Voltron Legendary Defender Season 7 has arrived. It's the longest season we've gotten in a long time, being 13 episodes rather than the 7 that we're used to, and it was quite satisfyingly emotional and action-packed. In the wake of their fight with Lotor and his Voltron and the destruction of the Castle of Lynes, Team Voltron made a choice to head to Earth to try to replace their base ship. We saw that at the end of last season. We knew that was going to be the plot of this one. And if this had been divided into half seasons, as some of the previous seasons have been, this would have stopped right when they got there. You can actually tell very seamlessly where the 2 seasons would have been made from this one season. There are other consequences to their battle, though. Being so close to the both gravitational and magical singularity that was the destruction of the Castle of Lynes bent time around the Paladins. They are now 3 years in the future. 3 years into the future of a universe that thought Voltron disappeared. They could no longer contact their allies in the Voltron Coalition. The Blades of Moira in particular don't seem to exist anymore. And the Paladins, in the configuration they're in now, with Keith as leader and Lance as an arm and Allura as a leg, aren't fully realized enough to re-energize Voltron the way that the original team could way back in, I think it was like season 1 or 2. And simply going back to their previous configuration wouldn't work either. They're no longer bonded with those particular lions. They need a home base, a mothership to recharge the lions. The lions are so weak at this point they can't even form Voltron. And with 3 years having passed, even their enemies are different now. They don't know what to expect as much. It really does seem like going back to Earth is their only option. Between the technology that was sent back there via Pidge's dad and all of the resources that Earth still has, untapped, spoiled by Galra rule, there is a chance that Earth could provide them with a new equivalent to the Castle of Lynes. With an extra 3 years having passed, there's a good chance that Earth has already started construction on something similar. The first half of the season is all about showing how the Paladins get to Earth, showing the very emotional journey to get to Earth, and then they kick in the pants with an emotional 2-parter, giving the history of Earth since Pidge's dad returned. And then the second half of the season is spent dealing with the events from that flashback to what Pidge's dad was up to, because it turns out the Galra have reached Earth. It's specifically Sendak, one of the older villains, the guy with the artificial arm who has been kind of a Shiro rival up to this point. Ever since Zarkon died, Sendak has been vying for the Galra throne, and for whatever reason, he seems to think that coming to Earth and trying to find the missing Voltron lions, and apparently spending several years doing it, will help him in those pursuits. I'll talk about that later. He sieges Earth, but thankfully the primary Galaxy Garrison headquarters, the one that Pidge's dad works at specifically, has upgraded their technology to the point that they can hold out. Now it's a genuine siege. They have defensive capabilities enough to hold off the Galra, but they don't have offensive capabilities enough to destroy them, and the Galra can't break through their defenses, but have more supplies. They can theoretically wait things out. And thankfully, the crazy Magi singularity didn't throw Voltron further into the future, because if they had thrown them just a little bit further into the future, everyone on Earth would have died. But they don't, and we get actually a pretty good war plot with like actual battlefield tactics being employed by the heroes, where they manage to take back Earth and use the technology provided by the Alteans. Not just the information and the technology that Pidge's dad brought back, but information and technology provided by Allura and Karan once they arrive. They drive the Galra off. They stop all of Sendak's plots. And by the end of the season, Earth does become the hub, the central point for the operations of Team Voltron, just like it was in the original series. It was honestly really impressive. Like, there were so many assets on the screen so often during the season that it had to be a pain in the ass to animate. Because, like, the ships and stuff are done in like a cartoonized CG. You see it in animated series all the time now. So that stuff is a little easier to animate than the rest, and you could see a couple of times in the season when they had to like spam a bunch of things on the screen all at once, like satellites in Earth orbit, for example, where they basically just copy-pasted the exact same model with the exact same movements and the exact same effects over and over again. It was a little bad, but they were small, insignificant moments amongst the rest, which were really great. We got emotional reunions between some of the Paladins and the family that they had left on Earth. Some great space battles. More of the Paladins solving their problems with wit rather than just strength and power. And even a fantastic final fight that served almost as a second climax to the season that I will talk about in a minute, but honestly, I think the first half of the season was more impressive to me. I really like flashback montage shows that do a good job of filling you in on everything that's gone on while the characters were away, and as I mentioned, the first half of the season ended with something like that. Now, obviously, an episode like that can be done wrong, but I thought this one was really good. I thought it worked super well and got you up to speed not just on the events, but also the characters. You came to actually like a lot of the characters who were going to be major players in the second half of the season. Characters who we had never seen before, and that was important. Like, we still don't really know them at all at this point, but you come to like them enough that you don't want to see anything happen to them, and that's really what matters, at least at this stage of the story. And everything that came before the flashback episode was pretty great. We got an episode devoted to Shiro getting used to his new body, which had some flashbacks to his past with Keith, and his past as part of the Galaxy Garrison that we had never even heard talked about before. But again, I also have some problems with that, so I'll talk about that in a minute too. Problems or not, though, they were very nice scenes. They managed to stir the emotional pot effectively, I think, and did fill in the history of this character, so I can't complain about that, at least. We got an episode devoted to what happened to the Blades while Voltron was absent for those 3 years, telling the story of how they tried to continue the fight in Voltron's place and failed miserably, and their numbers have been greatly reduced, and it really frickin' sucks. Keith's mom, though, does go off to try to reunite the Blades who are left and do something, I guess. We never really find out what she intends to do once that happens. Fight against the Galra some more, I guess. We even learn a little bit about the state of Galran politics at this point, but not a lot, and I think not enough, but again, I'll talk about that in a minute too. We find out that the Altean colony that Lotor set up has been evacuated, that no one is there anymore. Effectively, the start of this season gets us caught up enough on the goings-on in the rest of the universe that the story can effectively pick up from where it is now without us being too confused, just like the flashback two-parter at the end of the first half of the season gets us caught up on what's going on back at Earth. The highlight of this season, though, was a specific episode in which the Paladins are trapped outside of their Lynes, floating in space, unable to do anything. Their allies back on the Lynes, the rest of their team, i.e. like Karan and Rannil and all of them, including Shiro, because remember, Shiro is not a Paladin anymore by any stretch, are all inexplicably frozen in place. The Lynes may be as well, but you can't really tell at this point because their power is so low. It's just the Paladins floating around for who knows how long, their minds being affected by the void of space, the loneliness, the hunger, I would imagine. Oh, and the giant floaty psychic mind-tricking monster, which is trying to eat them, of course, because why the hell not? If Star Trek Voyager did it, then it's probably a smart enough idea for this cartoon, I guess. Now, I'm picking on the monster, but it actually worked well in the context of this episode. The characters, they started to come unraveled, and not just personally, but the team started to come unraveled too. I find it annoying when episodes like this don't tell you exactly how long the main characters spent floating in the void or trapped in the wasteland or whatever the hell the setting is, because otherwise it feels like they were only floating out there for something like 10 or 15 minutes, because really they were only floating out there for something like 10 or 15 minutes because that's how much of the episode was focused on it. The whole plot of this episode was that the characters floated out in space so long that their relationships started to crumble. They started to blame everyone else for what was going on, and then this monster swooped in and used that desperation and that anger to try to trick them and draw them in so that it could eat them, even though it could have just flown up and eaten them. At least the version of the monster in Voyager was like stationary, it couldn't move on its own. But here it works pretty well. They use enough dissolve transitions to really make you feel like time is passing. And heck, the presence of the monster could have even accelerated the process of them going nuts or whatever. Regardless of how ridiculous the framing device was or how effective or not it was really the performances that carried things. The animation on the characters' faces was top-notch, the timing of their animation was top-notch, the voice acting was top-notch. This episode addresses whether or not these people are actually friends, or if they're just a bunch of strangers thrust into the same situation, and it does so by leaving it open-ended so that the characters can then explore the idea at a later date, but by also making it clear that it doesn't matter, because friends or not, these characters do care about each other. Hunk gets the brunt of it in this episode when Keith starts to lose it and calls him out for being a coward. But at the end of the day, it's Hunk who sees through the evil plot of the giant psychic space monster. I cannot believe I just said that aloud. And who saves everyone else from it. He really solidifies himself in this episode as sort of the pillar holding up this team. Like, he can be an emotional core for this team, but that's not all that he is. He's also a source of strength for them, even if they've never really thought about it or realized it. He is the only character who is so constantly afraid that he can't help but show it, and yet he fights on, he flies on. And whether the other characters realize that or not, seeing that has helped to inspire them, to keep their morale up. And while any other issues that were brought up in that sequence when the characters were starting to lose it were left to kind of trail off with the assumption that nobody really meant the harsh things that were being said, they did, thankfully, soon after the fact, address this stuff between Hunk and Keith, with Keith apologizing to Hunk for what he said, and even admitting that in many ways he thinks that Hunk is the strongest of all of them. And honestly, I think this is one of the best scenes of the series, because I've been thinking this since the very beginning. Hunk is a character who in many ways inspires even me, and it always bothered me when I'd see people online saying that he was just a joke character, that he was just there so they could make fat jokes. That has never been the case. It's always been subtext how much the other characters rely on him. They decided to make it text here, probably specifically to shut those people up, and I could not be more thrilled about it. In fact, it's interesting, for the first time in this series, with the exception of a couple of plots and the very first episode of the season, the other paladins, including Keith, kind of take a back seat to Hunk and Lance. Hunk and Lance have both been characters who, up to this point, haven't gotten a lot of focus or development, and it was really nice to see them get more here. Like, they weren't really in the spotlight more than anyone else, but when there was focus to be focused on just one or two of the paladins, it seemed like they got it. It was a very, very refreshing change. And if this was in the plans for the series all along, I can kind of understand waiting to put them in the focus until now. There are a few things that I really have a problem with this season, though. We are given a very brief description of the Galra Empire as it exists 3 years after the fight with Lotor, that they are in a state of what is effectively civil war, that there are, at least it seems, even more factions now vying for the throne since Lotor isn't there to unify such a large group of the Empire. And considering that because of this, as a direct result of this, so many of the Blades died, and now Voltron can't get in touch with the Voltron Coalition at all. It seems as if I was actually kind of right in my previous review, that refusing to continue working with Lotor and his forces in spite of the terrible, unforgivable things that he did may have been a mistake. It may have cost the lives of millions, if not billions of people. But immediately, the problem of the Galra Empire and their state and their expansion is made an over there problem. And yes, I fully understand that as this season started, Team Voltron needed a way to charge the Lynes, either through a mothership or through having 5 fully realized paladins. That even if they wanted to at the start of the season, they could not have done anything about the state of the Galra Empire, and they probably still can't now. Like, let's not kid ourselves, Civil War politics are messy. But the fact that they barely even gave lip service to trying and then sent their allies off again to do it for them is just stupid. I would almost rather they not have told us what the state of the Galran Empire was at all this season and just had Sendak show up at Earth and seem like he was in charge. Like, in charge of the whole thing. Saving the reveal that there are other factions of Galra out there aside from the Galran pirates that we see in one episode of the season, led by some of Lotor's old generals, for next season when I expect this stuff is all going to be mopped up. I mean, wouldn't letting us believe that the Galra are a unified force make Sendak's threat more threatening? Wouldn't it also explain away my other major problem with the season, which is, why is Sendak at Earth? If he is one of the powers vying for control of the Galran Empire, yes, Voltron would help with that, but he should know enough about Voltron by now, just through osmosis, to know that you can't just force the Lynes to do what you want. So wouldn't staying behind and solidifying his position at the top of the Empire be his priority at this point? Wouldn't leaving for the several years it takes to go and conquer Earth only risk his enemies unifying for his return? It just doesn't make sense from a tactical standpoint in the slightest. And if there were some extenuating circumstances which led Sendak to believe that going after Voltron on Earth, of all places, was a smart idea, if that reason exists somewhere in the minds of the creators of the show, they never make it clear through dialogue once in this season. Sendak has just gone back to the old Galra plot of trying to get the Lynes. It's totally uninspired, and I didn't find it believable in the slightest. But considering that they have an entire 13-episode season coming, I think end of the year or early next year, I don't actually no, to mop all these things up, to resolve all these issues, I have faith that they will do so in a relatively satisfactory way at the very least. After all, there is a chance that one of these factions vying for control is the faction that Lotor started with all of his lies about peace and unity. That there are true believers of that way of life out there in the Galran Empire, and they have come together to vie for the throne. Maybe they will even be major allies to Voltron and Earth next season. Because honestly, I'll just say it right now, if the writers go back to treating the entire Galran Empire, without exception, as villains again, after spending so much time with the Galra last season and showing that many of them really are open to the idea of a peaceful Galran Empire, I'm going to be very upset. End of the day, though, these things are minor complaints in an otherwise great season. And while we are on the topic of minor complaints, I would like to briefly mention the issue of Shiro's significant other who was left behind on Earth when Shiro went on the original Kerberos mission. If you follow news for this show at all, then you already know, whether you've seen the season or not, that Shiro has been revealed to be a gay character. He left someone behind when he went on the Kerberos mission, someone who did not want him to go into space again, and that person was another man. And that is not the part that I take issue with. I want to be absolutely clear about that. The part that I take issue with is that this character was only just revealed. We saw them interact for one scene, in a flashback, which may not have been entirely accurate to the situation to begin with. And then Shiro's boyfriend is one of the characters who dies in the initial invasion of Earth. Unlike all the characters who were introduced during the two-parter, catching us up on events on Earth, we do not spend enough time with this character to actually care about him. The narrative is dependent on Shiro's connection with this character to propel us into caring about this person, to caring about the fact that he died. But because the characters haven't interacted with each other in any meaningful ways, even the voice actor for Shiro, whose name escapes me at the moment, but you know what I'm talking about, even he doesn't sell the fact that Shiro cares about this person, and he's a brilliant voice actor. Not to mention the fact that this is very, very close to being a bury your gays type of trope. It is common in fiction for gay characters to be introduced just to be killed off for shock value. And that feels like what this is. It is only the fact that I am sure that whether this person had been a man, a woman, or something in between, they would have died in the same way that prevents me from calling it out as such wholeheartedly. I think the real mistake here is that this plotline was not set up at all in the past of the show. We didn't even know that Shiro had someone special back home. Even just lip service to that would have helped here. Would have helped to form an initial emotional connection between the audience and this character, but instead they just tossed this character into the season haphazardly and expected it to actually matter, and at the end of the day, it didn't. It makes me wonder why this was here, and it almost comes off as cruel. At the end of the day, Season 7 was a great season for the main characters. Everyone came into their own in one way or another. There was even a pretty fantastic homage to one of my favorite absurd aspects of the Voltron lore, I guess you would call it. A robot affectionately dubbed Vehicle Voltron by the fans. An Earth-made Voltron made from reverse-engineered alien technology. The version that we got in this show wasn't exactly the same, but it was definitely based on the same principles. Between its reveal and the final battle, which acted as a second climax to the season, which felt, in many ways, very reminiscent of the original series, I liked this. I ate it up. But it also had problems. There was a great hook left in that second climax for the next season, a great cliffhanger for the next season, setting up what I think is going to be a fantastic mystery. But things were left dangling, which shouldn't have been. In a season where things fit together as well as they did in this one, with even the explosion of the Castle of Lynes having some added meaning at the climax of the season, the fact that we were dropped hints about the state of the Galran Empire and then teased that the Voltron Coalition might not exist anymore, and then at the end of the season, they just kind of undo a bunch of that. Like, I don't want to spoil the season finale for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, but they kind of imply that the Galran Empire maybe isn't in as much turmoil as we thought, because characters are able to leave it, they're able to escape it, and seemingly pretty easily to come to Earth. And yes, Earth, and I would imagine probably the surrounding space and planets, have kind of become a new hub for the Voltron Coalition, but they never explain how they got there, how they escaped Galran space, where they were for those 3 years, why they can contact them now but couldn't before. There also seems to be a pretty significant time jump at the end of this season that isn't gone into detail about at all, where aliens show up and start helping the humans to rebuild Earth. We see species from members of the Voltron Coalition and even returning characters who I wouldn't have expected to see yet. I guess if I had to describe this season as briefly and succinctly as possible, I would say that it's a season with some really great character moments and some really great action that is also really messy. It has a lot of problems, and while I do think most, if not all of those problems will be solved next season, I just feel like maybe there were too many of them this season. Maybe they left too many of them there this season. It really does seem like they were so focused on getting the show to this place, to getting the show to this new status quo, that being a Team Voltron that is based on Earth, that they let good storytelling fall by the wayside more than once to get them there. I liked this season. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed it a lot, but I think that it may be the biggest mixed bag of a season since the first. There have undoubtedly been better seasons of the show, and I certainly hope that the next season, the last season of the show, is better than this, that it is among the best seasons of the series rather than the worst. All of that said though, guys, what did you think of this season of Voltron Legendary Defender? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.